The morning began like any other, the ocean stretching endlessly beneath a pale sky, its surface rippling with the kind of deceptive calm that often hides secrets below. Fishermen aboard the vessel Aurora Dawn had weathered storms, ice, and nights so black they felt swallowed by the sea itself. But that day carried a silence so complete it made even the most seasoned sailors uneasy. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Captain Elias Turner, a man with 3 decades of salt and wind etched into his face, noticed at first the stillness wasn't natural. His instincts, sharpened by years at sea, told him something extraordinary was about to unfold. As the crew hauled in their nets, First Mate Rebecca Hayes suddenly froze. Her voice, usually steady, trembled with disbelief as she pointed toward the horizon. There, in the mirror-like water, a massive shape struggled against the current. At first they thought it was driftwood or debris, but then it moved. The unmistakable outline of a bear, far from shore, impossibly far, cut through the waves. Yet it wasn't the distance from land that made their blood run cold. It was the way the animal behaved. Instead of thrashing wildly as any creature would when drowning, it seemed to hover in place, its head lifted just high enough to breathe, its eyes fixed directly on their boat. "Is it watching us?" one sailor whispered, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Every movement of the vessel was met with a subtle shift from the bear, as if it were aligning itself with them. Deliberate, intentional, impossible. Then came the gesture that none of them would ever forget. Slowly, with surprising grace, the bear raised one paw above the water, holding it there in an uncanny echo of a human plea for help. In that instant, fear and awe collided. The crew knew they were witnessing something far beyond chance. What looked like a rescue waiting to happen was only the first step into a mystery that would test everything they thought they knew about the natural world. The crew of the Aurora Dawn exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had ever seen anything like it. A wild animal, miles from shore, not panicking, not fleeing, but staring back at them with an intensity that seemed almost human. Captain Elias steadied his hands on the wheel. "Prepare the nets," he ordered, his voice betraying a hint of doubt. He had rescued stranded seals and even hauled in wounded seabirds before, but never a full-grown bear. Logic told him it was impossible. Instinct told him they had no choice. Engineer Marcus O'Neill quickly stripped down one of the vessel's largest fishing nets, fashioning it into a sling. Rebecca Hayes, who had once worked with marine wildlife researchers, kept her eyes fixed on the struggling creature. "It's not thrashing," she muttered. "It's pacing itself, almost like it knows we're coming." The first attempt failed miserably. The bear's weight dragged the net under, nearly pulling 2 crewmen with it. Everyone braced for chaos, for teeth and claws, for a desperate animal's fight to survive. But instead, the bear held perfectly still. It didn't lash out, didn't try to break free. It simply floated, watching them, as though analyzing what had just gone wrong. "Try again," Elias barked, though inside his heart was pounding. On the second approach, something even more startling happened. Just as they maneuvered the net beneath its massive frame, the bear rolled slightly to one side, easing the process, as if cooperating with the rescue. Rebecca's hands shook as she gripped the railing. "That's impossible," she whispered. When at last the crew hoisted the animal from the water, time itself seemed to slow. Water poured in shimmering streams from its fur, and yet the bear remained calm, suspended above the deck like some ancient guardian rising from the depths. Its gaze swept deliberately from sailor to sailor, locking eyes with each one in turn. Marcus swore under his breath. "It's looking at us like it understands." The silence was suffocating as the bear was gently lowered onto the deck. Every man and woman braced for the eruption of primal fury they knew should follow. Instead, the creature sat back on its haunches, dripping seawater, and placed one enormous paw against its chest. A collective gasp tore through the crew. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't instinct. It was a gesture, clear, deliberate, impossible to deny. Rebecca's tranquilizer gun slipped from her hand and clattered to the deck. "That's not just gratitude," she whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "That's communication." And deep down, each of them knew this was only the beginning. For a moment, no one moved. The sound of dripping seawater echoed across the deck as the bear sat there, calm and motionless, its paw pressed against its chest. The gesture was too precise, too deliberate to dismiss as coincidence. Sailors who had seen storms rip apart ships now stood frozen, their fear replaced with an emotion they couldn't quite name. Captain Elias Turner finally broke the silence. "Easy," he murmured, though his words felt as much for himself as for his crew. He had faced countless dangers at sea, but never had his instincts been so utterly confounded. Then something happened that would etch itself into their memories forever. As the crew shuffled backward, Marcus slipped on the wet deck, his boots sliding dangerously close to the railing. Before anyone could react, the bear lunged, not with teeth or claws, but with startling grace. It planted itself between Marcus and the edge, allowing him to grab onto its thick fur and steady himself. Only when Marcus was safe did the bear step back, calm as ever, as if saving a man's life was the most natural thing in the world. "Did it just help him?" Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling. The crew had no time to process what they'd witnessed. A low, unsettling thrum shivered through the deck, the sound of the ship's fuel pump sputtering. Marcus, still shaken, crouched to investigate, but before he could locate the issue, the bear began pawing insistently at a section of the floorboards. Curious and unnerved, Marcus pried them open. His jaw dropped. A hairline crack in the fuel line had been leaking steadily, hidden from even his trained eye. The bear sat back on its haunches, watching him discover the fault with an expression that could only be described as expectant, as if it had known all along. The hours that followed grew stranger still. The sea, once calm, began to churn as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Wind howled across the deck, and the Aurora Dawn groaned under the weight of towering waves. The crew fought desperately to secure equipment as thunder split the sky. And then, impossibly, the bear moved among them. It braced heavy crates with its massive strength, pressing them against the deck until sailors could lash them down. When a barrel broke free, rolling dangerously toward the cabin doors, the bear intercepted it, shoving it aside with a precision no wild animal should have had. Side by side with the crew, it worked through the chaos, undeterred by the storm's fury. Rebecca caught her breath as she watched. It's not just helping, it knows what we're trying to do. But the most extraordinary moment came in the eye of the storm. The crew had left out a container of fresh water, intending to ration it when the worst had passed. The bear approached it slowly. Yet instead of drinking, it nudged the container toward the sailors one by one, waiting patiently for each to take their share before finally lowering its muzzle for its own. That simple act of consideration shattered whatever doubts remained. This was no ordinary creature. This was something else, something that defied every boundary they thought separated humans from the wild. As the storm eased and the sea glowed orange beneath the sinking sun, the bear did one last thing that left the crew in stunned silence. From their catch, it gathered small fish in its paws and began tossing them into the air, feeding the gulls that circled hungrily overhead. Each throw was precise, almost deliberate, as though the bear wanted every bird to have its turn. Captain Elias, a man who had scoffed at tales of omens and miracles his entire life, felt his skepticism unravel. He found himself sitting near the animal, speaking to it in a low voice, as if it were one of his own crew. To his astonishment, the bear tilted its head, listening, even grunting softly in rhythm to his words, like a companion answering back. And just when the crew thought they had seen everything, that nothing could surprise them further, something began to happen that would make all of these wonders pale in comparison. By the time dawn broke the next morning, the crew of the Aurora Dawn no longer looked at the bear as cargo or even as a rescued animal. It had become something else entirely, a presence aboard their ship that shifted the air itself. The coastline finally came into view, jagged cliffs glowing in the first light. For the crew, The sight should have brought relief. Yet all eyes were fixed on the bear. It sat upright near the stern, its massive head turned toward the approaching land, watching with the intensity of a navigator plotting a course. Then came the act that no sailor aboard would ever forget. Using its paw, dampened in water from the drinking barrel, the bear began tracing lines across the deck. At first the crew assumed it was random scratching, but then Marcus leaned closer. His face drained of color. "Captain," he whispered, "that's a map." They gathered in stunned silence as the bear sketched the outline of the very coastline rising before them. With astonishing clarity, it marked certain spots with wet paw prints, jagged X's directly over unseen dangers. Elias compared it to the charts in his cabin. His breath caught in his throat. The markings aligned perfectly with reefs and submerged rocks hidden beneath the waves, hazards invisible to the human eye. The captain hesitated, torn between reason and instinct, but in the end he trusted what he saw. He adjusted their course. Later, investigators would confirm the truth. Had they continued along their original path, they would have run straight into a deadly reef. Still shaken, Rebecca raised her camera to capture the moment. As if sensing the lens, the bear turned, retrieving a piece of rope from the deck. With deliberate motions, it began tying knots, complex sailors' knots used by the crew to secure their catch. When it finished, it lifted the rope, almost posing with its creation, before gently laying it down at Rebecca's feet. Marcus muttered, "This isn't mimicry. It knows what it's doing." And then, as if the line between possible and impossible hadn't already been crossed, the ocean offered its own witness. A family of whales surfaced near the bow, their dark forms rising and falling with the swells. The bear lifted its head and released a series of deep, rhythmic sounds, unlike any natural bear call. The whales answered. For several long minutes, man, beast, and leviathan shared the sea in what could only be described as a conversation across species. The crew stood transfixed, tears stinging their eyes, goosebumps rising on their arms. Sailors who had never prayed a day in their lives found themselves whispering under their breath, as though they were intruding on something sacred. At last, the coastline grew near enough for them to release their unlikely companion. Elias ordered the ramp lowered. The bear padded halfway down before stopping. Slowly, it turned back toward the crew, as though unwilling to leave without one final message. It searched the deck, selecting a broken shard of wood from the storm's wreckage. With deliberate care, its claws etched lines into the surface. When at last it placed the piece into Elias's calloused hands, the captain nearly dropped it in shock. Carved into the wood was a rough but unmistakable image, the outline of their ship. 5 small marks represented the crew. A 6th, larger mark stood beside them, and together, all were enclosed in a single circle. Rebecca's voice cracked as she whispered, "It drew itself as one of us." No one spoke as the bear descended the ramp. At the edge, it rose on its hind legs, towering in silhouette against the golden horizon. Once again, it pressed a paw to its chest. This time, it held the gesture for a full minute, as though imprinting it on their memories forever. Then, in a movement so eerily human it chilled them to the core, the bear raised its other paw high, as if to wave goodbye. The silence that followed was unbearable. When the beast finally disappeared into the mist, the crew stood motionless, united by the unspoken knowledge that they had been part of something far greater than themselves. And yet, as extraordinary as the past 2 days had been, fate was not finished with them. Because 3 nights later, on the open sea, the horizon would reveal a sight that would change not only their lives, but the very way humanity viewed the world. 3 nights after the farewell, the Aurora Dawn returned to its usual fishing grounds. The crew tried to convince themselves the experience had been a dream, a story they would carry but never again relive. But legends don't end so easily. On the horizon, movement stirred. At first it was only seabirds, wheeling in tight formations. Then dark shapes broke the surface. Whales, dozens of them, rising in perfect rhythm. And there, leading them through the waves with steady, confident strokes, was the bear. But it wasn't alone. Two other bears swam at its side, their massive bodies flanked by orcas that formed a protective corridor. The procession moved like an honor guard, a living spectacle of sea and sky united. The sailors aboard other nearby vessels stood in stunned silence, pointing and shouting, unsure whether to cheer or pray. As the bear drew closer, it carried something clutched delicately in its jaws. One by one, it presented the crew with seashells, each one chosen with uncanny care, matching the colors of the clothing they had worn on the day of the rescue. Rebecca wept openly. It remembered, she whispered. It remembered us. And then, before their disbelieving eyes, the bear began teaching the others. With slow, deliberate movements, it reenacted the gestures it had learned aboard the Aurora Dawn. The paw over the chest, the wave of farewell, the cooperative hauling of nets. The other bears followed, imitating the sequence in remarkable unison. By the time the sun set, the ocean itself seemed transformed into a stage, alive with a performance no human audience had ever imagined. A miracle, carried on fur and fin and feather. Captain Elias gripped the carved wooden token tighter in his hands, tears welling in his weathered eyes. "This isn't the end," he murmured. "It's the beginning of something we may never fully understand." And in that moment, every man and woman aboard knew they hadn't just rescued a bear. They had awakened a bond that would ripple far beyond the horizon. Want to hear more incredible stories where nature defies the impossible? Don't miss our next tale. Subscribe and join us in discovering the miracles waiting in the wild.